All right, I've got a thunderstorm going on here in South Florida, so we'll see if I can get through this video. This week we're talking about the power of non-literal perception. Those who chat with me and talk with me on a regular basis probably know that I very routinely refer to taking things literally, or I give advice, don't take things so literally. And that's kind of a mystifying statement. It's not the easiest type of awareness to maintain, this non-literal perception. Okay, so what I normally mean by that is you've got a WYSIWYG reality. WYSIWYG stands for what you see is what you get. And then you have the hidden side of things, which are behind the scenes, which probably are more accurate as far as what's going on. So in other words, this is a YouTube channel about the occult. Occult literally means hidden. And so most of us will tend to focus on the visible side of things because that's how our biology has been oriented towards the outward world. And so we will tend to interpret what we see in terms of what we get. In other words, we interpret things in terms of surface level reality. In other words, most of us are superficial. And it's the mark of a cultivated, cultured personality that they become less superficial. In other words, they learn to appreciate the hidden side of things, the invisibles. It's kind of like when you go to an art museum. Are you looking at the visible aspect of the art? Yes, you are, but you're mostly focusing on what's coming through the art, what's being conveyed. And of course, a lot of pretentious jargon can come up. Same thing goes for magic and the occult. When we focus on magic and the occult, there is a pretend aspect to it, the charlatan aspect to it, and there's the real deal. There are the artists who create the works of art, and then there are the people who collect the art, who pretend to know what's going on with the art and have all kinds of pretentious jargon. When we speak of things literally, it's not always in terms of surface world. So when we subscribe to literalism, a limited mode of perception in which one sees the world only in terms of a single, usually superficial interpretation. Okay? So when there's one way of seeing things, that tends to be a literal way of looking at it, okay? It's also called monovision. It's also called monotheism. If there's one God, then there's one correct way of doing everything, right? All right. And this is not to say that relativism is really the way to go either. Okay, and what I tend to advocate for is a non-dual perspective on the universe. What does that mean? Well, maybe that's a subject for a later video. Right now, what we want to concern ourselves with is the non-literal mode of perception. In other words, you want to avoid literalism. So when you see things happening in the magical universe, there's a tendency to apply only one meaning to every kind of thing that you see. Okay, in other words, if you're looking at the tarot, oh, this tarot card means this, and that's all it means. So when you learn how to use the tarot, it's more like you learn how to have a conversation with each card, and each card has multiple things, many things to say. Each card is pretty much a being or a spirit that has its own perspective on things. That's always speaking. And this speaking spirit says various things. Okay, so and if you approach the tarot cards as this card has that meaning and that card has this meaning, that is the viewpoint of a non-initiate. A non-initiate tends to see things literally. An initiate tends to operate in a non-literal mode of perception. So let's dissect or analyze literalism. I came across some cool references to the literalistic perspective. The literalist perspective in this book by James Hillman, The Dream and the Underworld. I'm not sure it's actually this color, and if you go buy one of these, it's kind of faded. It's been sitting in the sun, but it's a book about dreams and the underworld. And of course, what he advocates for, James Hillman, is not saying, "Oh, when a tiger appears in your dream, that represents the devouring nature of the subconscious, and that's the meaning of the tiger." No, 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 no. When a tiger appears in your dream, you adopt an element of curiosity. What does it have to say? What does it mean right now? I was going to say, what does it mean for me? But that's also a literalistic way of looking at things. Like everything's about you. Okay. In other words, the tigers are rising now. What is it saying about things that are happening? Like, or what is it just simply saying? Let's have a conversation with the tiger. So one type of literalism is the most obvious type, and that is dogmatism, seeing things in terms of dogma. A very obvious one way of being dogmatic would be to say that the crucifixion of Jesus, that's the only way that God and man can come together. Okay, or through that symbol of the sacrifice Jesus, that's the only way that you can get to God. Or Jesus is the only name by which you can be saved, whatever that means. And so any other, spiritual tradition is right out. Then it has to be through the image of Jesus. Or curiously, if you can only be saved through the name of Jesus, which pronunciation of Jesus do you need to use in order to get the correct one? Joshua, Yeshua, Jesus. Like, in other words, there's all kinds of different names within that name, right? Only one of them is correct? Okay, well, if there are variations on names, there are also variations on images. There are also variations on characters. So, can you be saved through the image of the Buddha who's meditating under the tree? Do you have to be nailed up against the tree, or can you be sitting in meditation under the tree? So multiple images can convey grace and beauty, and that can be the saving grace aspect of the universe. Okay, anyway, dogmatism. Another form of dogma would be the more superficial kind, and that is, what we're actually witnessing with the crucifixion of Jesus is a political zealot who is being punished by the Romans or the Jews, depending on how you interpret the story. And that's all there is to it. Just a political zealot who was very religious, possibly fanatic, whatever, and then that's all that there is to it. There's nothing spiritual there at all, blah, blah, blah. It's just a historical sort of interpretation. A single way of looking at any phenomenon tends to be literalism. Okay, and dogmatism is a really good example of that. There's only one story that's appropriate for each scenario. Whereas, as anybody knows, there are many kinds of stories you can make up about the same scenario. Just ask a police investigator. Causalism. We talked about this in the last video, didn't we? Cause and effect, or the lusting for results. And very often, it's obvious when people talk about magic that they're non-initiates when they talk about, oh, I did this ritual and it caused this to happen. I did this ritual and it caused this to happen. Oh, I saw this when I went outside the door, and then this thing followed after as a cause and effect relationship. Right? There's lots of cause and effect going on. And naturally, that's a very superficial way of looking at magic. Okay. And in the last video, we only barely sort of touched upon that there's an acausal type of causality. Okay, so an initiate would speak of cause and effect in terms of the vertical dimension of causality. Okay, in other words, the universe buds forth various cause and effect relationships. Okay, and the cause and effect relationships are horizontal. This here causes this over here. And that causal connection, that line you're drawing between the two, doesn't really exist because they actually come from the higher dimension. Both arise together in some mysterious way. And so if you're going to be an initiate talking about magic, it's going to be the vertical dimension of causality. We could call that metacausality. Okay, so speaking of magic only in terms of causality is another single-minded way of looking at it. It's not wrong, okay, to do that, to interpret it that way. It's just a single-minded way of looking at it. There are other ways of looking at magic. Naturalism, that magic is nature, and everything that has to do with magic is natural magic, and it's sort of like the naturalistic fallacy. That's like, well, if it's natural, it must be healthy, that sort of thing. And if your magic doesn't involve oak trees and squirrels and fauns and fairies and pixies and streams and earth, air, fire, water, if it doesn't involve the forces of nature, then it's somehow not really magic. Okay, so there's the fallacy of naturalism. Is it wrong? No, it's not wrong to view your magical practice in terms of naturalism. But if your interpretation of magic is stuck in that interpretation, it's limiting. It's literalistic. Kind of like when you look at nature, what you see is what you get, sort of thing. Then there is supernaturalism. I'm glad I spelled that right. One of the problems with supernaturalism, especially from a non-dual perspective, is that it tends to be dualistic. And that is, there is a supernatural world and there's a natural world. And if I'm going to do a ritual, it's always about drawing power down from the supernatural world into the natural world, and all about communicating from the natural world to the supernatural world. Okay. Once again, this is not incorrect, and many times when I speak of magic, I use the supernaturalist interpretation. Okay, but are any of these views on reality correct? No, they are simply takes on reality, or you could say all of them are correct, but only in part. And if you get stuck in one, you're guilty of literalism. Okay, and of course, you're talking to an adept or an initiate, they tend to not view things literalistically, like only in terms of one reality or one take on reality. Moralism, this is a good one. Oh my goodness. Yeah, a lot of times when people are new to magic, it's all about the black magic and the white magic, the evil magic and the good magic. And if you see a Hollywood movie, there's a lot of black magic and maybe some white magic, or all magic is black, right? Something like that. Even those who say magic is neither black nor white, it simply is, that's still a bit of a moralistic interpretation, but it does start to free you up to view magic as something other than, is this good magic or evil magic? Is this a angel or a demon? And I think the most interesting characters in any drama are those that are neither good nor evil, where they appear good at first, and then they reveal their true colors, and vice versa. So is moralism wrong when it comes to your interpretation of magic? No, not at all. In fact, the moralistic perspective on magic is really important. And it becomes a bit of a trap too. Like one of the biggest themes in magic, especially high magic or ceremonial magic, is pride and egotism. These are the vices of Satan in Paradise Lost. His pride caused his fall, sort of thing. And the magician adopts magical powers as though he's trying to usurp the powers of heaven, like become a god himself, sort of thing, right? And So moralism becomes really important in magic, mainly in regards to humility and what it really takes, and to become an adept, let's say. Um, a good example of somebody who had trouble with moralism would be somebody like Aleister Crowley. They didn't have a word for what he was at the time. I hate to slap a label on him, but it's pretty obvious he was a classic narcissist. If you look at what narcissism is, in terms of one of the antisocial personality disorders, not just not just being self-centered. Almost everybody suffers from that a little bit. But classic narcissism that is like a diagnosis from a psychologist, let's say. If anybody has known a narcissist, then you know, oh, these people apparently really exist. Okay, and Crowley apparently was a narcissist, or you could have diagnosed him as a narcissist. One of the things about narcissists is that condition is essentially incurable. I'm not sure whether that's true, but that's the way that people tend to define it. Not that the condition can't be managed. And one of the things, other than focusing on yourself and your own aggrandizement, one of the things that's characteristic of a narcissist is a lack of empathy. And that is something characteristic of all of the antisocial personality disorders: psychopathy, sociopathy, and narcissism. And if you look through the writings of Crowley, he gives lip service to moralism. In fact, there's a lot of Christian moralism sort of like infiltrated its way into his writing. And what you'll notice is that people who lack empathy or seem to have sort of an antisocial personality disorder thing going on, they can be very dogmatic about what good and evil is. And they'll enter positions where they'll become the inquisitor, and then they'll torture you for being a witch. Confess, confess. And they'll devise all kinds of horrible things to do to you to get you to confess. So there's a lot of morality going on in their universe, but it's a twisted form of morality. It's almost like the psyche is trying to understand what's wrong with itself, and so it really gets deep into the morality dramas around it and becomes an inquisitor. Or so moralism is very important in magic, but of course, got to be careful with it. And if you are listening to this and you are a narcissist, you wouldn't know it. Narcissists tend to. One of the symptoms of being a narcissist is that you simply cannot see it. It's weird, isn't it? Because they also tend to be pretty smart. Personalism. So viewing magic in terms of personalism. Everything is about my path. What's my destiny? I must go find and fulfill my destiny. I'm looking for my higher self. Is there anything wrong with that? No, of course not. So all these various perspectives on magic crop up as we deal with magic. But if you get stuck in one of them, and that's your only way of looking at it, then you are stuck. You're stuck on the surface, in the surface world. You're stuck in one interpretation of magic. And the idea of the magician is to be more of a juggler. All these different perspectives are perspectives that you can change. Or maybe you're like a Mad Hatter. Put on a different hat, and suddenly you have a different perspective. It's like, wait a minute, I have a different situation now. Let's adopt another perspective for this one. So all these various perspectives, dogmatism, personalism, naturalism, all these things are tools in your toolbox. There are perspectives that you can adopt. Temporalism. Everything is about the future of humanity or the past. We worship the ancestors and we make our ancestors proud. And it's all about the end times, or it's all about time going in a spiral and evolution. So yeah, if anybody talks to me on a regular basis, I do tend to use temporalism sometimes. I speak in magic in terms of facilitating your evolution as though you're going somewhere, you're evolving into some bigger, great, grander form in the future. Temporalism. Nothing wrong with looking at magic this way, but it's helpful to also think in according to the present moment. Some people would say the present moment is all there truly is. Time doesn't exist. There's a subject for another video. So temporalism can be problematic if you get stuck in that interpretation. It's all about the future of humankind and utopia or dystopia. Where are we all headed? Oh, we have to get ready for what's coming. Voluntarism. This is for people who believe in free will. And so everything's a choice. This will drive Libras crazy, I think. But so everything is about making a choice. Oh, I've come to a crossroads in my life, and now I need to pick which way to go. Everything's about doing. And doership is one of the big impediments to enlightenment, supposedly, and that is that if you think that you can facilitate your own process of enlightenment, you are mistaken. That's a Christian thing too. In other words, you can't do it yourself. You need the saving grace, like Jesus, to come and into your life or something like that. And there's an element of truth to that as well, as far as so in other words, the doership element. The interesting thing about, let's say, meditation is that many people see meditation as something you do, and that can be a major headache for you because meditation really means sitting still and doing nothing. So voluntarism gets thrown out the window. Okay, but there are many forms of meditation where you go about doing something, at least for a while, until that drops away, and then you can do the non-voluntarism form of meditation or non-meditation. Humanism. You know, this is one of my favorites because humanism is something that was big in the Italian Renaissance. And it really came as a rescuing influence after the Dark Ages when the Christian church was telling you that you're full of sin and you must be, purged of evil, and you must be protected from evil, and you must be saved from the dark powers, and original sin infiltrates your very flesh, and you're all dirty and stinky. And in the Renaissance, when the Hermetic tradition came back, it was largely about seeing man as the measure of all things. The humanity, the human figure is at the center of the cosmos. And you even get this in Buddhism, where the most auspicious form of incarnation is a human form, because that's the only form in which you can become enlightened. Humanism, interesting idea, but it interprets all of magic in terms of human connections, human will, human goodness, humans as the center of the universe. Are we the center of the universe? Yes and no. Maybe. Subjectivism. So what I want to focus on here, you could also say that people psychologize all over magic. And they say the demons are just all in your head. You're conjuring demons or angels, and these are just parts of the brain that you're waking up. In other words, what you're experiencing in this grand experiment of yours, which is magic, is confined to the subject of the experiment. It's inside you. It's not in the universe. It's in your head. It's all in your head. It's all in the subject. In other words, an experiment has subjects that are being experimented on, okay? And what they claim is happening is very often just, if they're giving their opinions, they say, well, that's subjective. That's just your opinion, man. Okay. So subjectivism can also be a way of looking at magic. It's all in your head. It's all psychological. It's all brain chemistry. Positivism. Now this one's interesting. This is not positive psychology. This is more the philosophy of positivism. Um, Positivism is easy to understand if you think of positive, negative. Okay, so the positive side of things, according to positivism, is the verifiable side, the measurable, the visible, the things that you can confirm. And the things that you can't confirm, which are sort of hidden or mushy or in the background, are negative, I guess. Though I've never heard of a positivist refer to hidden things as negative. But positivism tends to focus on what's in the foreground and visible. So positivists are also very interesting in regards to magic because they will tend to look at only the things that are verifiable. So they're the kind of people who will attach electrodes to your head when you're doing meditations or when you're doing rituals to see what your brainwave pattern is doing. When you tilt your eyes up in your head, they measure the alpha waves that you're producing, that sort of thing. All the measurable aspects of magic. This is where the biohacking comes in, because we're only focusing on the things that we can measure and see. And there's a lot of cause and effect going on with that too. And there's a lot of focus on the positive benefits of meditation or the benefits of magic or what you put into it and what you get out of it. If magic is a black box, they don't focus on the black box. They just focus on what you put into it and what you get out of it. Yeah, a lot of people do this too, especially the chaos magicians, trying to be all scientific and whatnot. Scientistic. So, what is a non-literal perspective? I say it's an unlimited mode, but that means simply a mode that is not limited to one thing. I don't mean unlimited like it's infinite. So a non-literal perspective or perception is an unlimited mode in which one sees the world through many possible perspectives. Interesting thing is, James Hillman, when he talks about the gods of pagan religions, he often refers to them as perspectives. It's a cool way of looking at them. And that's a pluralistic way of looking at the psyche, too. Which is another sort of dogma you could get caught up inside. But, of course, a pluralistic psyche is pretty cool because it is not literal. Because remember, a literal interpretation of something insists that there's only one meaning of everything it encounters. Okay, and usually that meaning is superficial. Not always, but it's like there's one meaning for everything. And so if you have a sort of pagan psyche, pagan view on things, then you have multiple different gods going on, and each one of them has a different way of looking at the universe. Kind of cool, really, because then if you don't like paganism, you can just adopt a multi-spheroth perspective. In other words, the spheroth on the tree of life. Each sphera has a perspective, the way the universe looks. Okay, how does the universe look to the Greek god Hermes? Probably as a big joke. Sometimes serious, but usually not. And like the universe, according to Aphrodite, would be everything is love and attraction and jealousy. And yeah, a lot of interesting stuff there. So if you're going to have a non-literal perception on reality, it's going to be more akin to a sort of pagan viewpoint, or at least a pluralistic, viewpoint. If you think about it, that's what makes so many dramas, especially plays. If you go to see a play, like with real flesh and blood actors, one of the biggest values of that is that you get multiple perspectives on the same scenario, especially if it's a situational comedy, which can be very amusing because everybody sees something different happening and they're interpreting it through their lens. And the differences between those interpretations can be quite funny. And this brings us to something called reification. I first heard this word in Buddhism, and then I later came across it in dream yoga. And so this is going to be a subject maybe for the next video. Okay, the problem that we have is that if you have a literal way of looking at reality, like there's only one truth or one true way of seeing everything, you're going to tend to reify it that way, that that's the way it's real. Okay, interesting. And if you have a non-literal view on phenomena around you, nothing's quite real because you have multiple different ways of describing everything you see. So any one of those different takes you have on reality isn't quite real. Okay, and so to reify something is to crystallize it into one thing. Say, I've got it now. This is it. Okay. So I think I'm going to talk about reification as the primary enemy of people who want to learn astral projection. Yeah. So reification can be a big problem for slipping behind the scenes of physical reality and entering that strange pagan underworld that we call the astral plane. Is there room for monotheism in this strange pagan underworld? Of course there is. You just think of monotheism the way that the ancient Egyptians thought of it. Or even the Greeks themselves, because they were sort of monotheistic as well. Even as they had all these different pagan deities, there was the one and the good, which was behind them all. Very interesting. So in other words, and Kabbalah comes to the rescue there too, because it has multiple spheroth, multiple levels, and each level and each sphera has its own perspective on reality. And yet all these things are bodied forth from God or Ein Sof or the unmanifest. All right, so yeah, the value of non-literal perspective is to let go of the one true way of seeing things. And so if you're new to magic, you're going to tend to see it probably in a causal sort of way, in terms of causalism. If you're Wiccan, maybe in terms of naturalism, okay? Or if you are, if you see lots of things in terms of parapsychology, like in other words, supernatural phenomena, that's supernaturalism. You tend to see magic in terms of supernaturalism, which you can kind of get stuck there. Okay, and then there's a lot of things in magic that will kind of not be on your radar then, like the biohacking and the natural magic with herbs and stones and stuff like that. Anyway, all right, so maybe the next video is going to be finally about astral projection, and probably mainly about the enemy of anybody who tries to practice astral projection, and that is the habit of reification, the tendency to take something you're seeing, to take something that you're perceiving and say, that perception that I have, that's real. You're reifying it. And then that becomes a barrier because then you can't get past it, can't get into the astral plane, you can't get past your concepts. Okay, so we'll talk about that maybe next video. All right, until next time.